All right, now we're joined by Mike McGinn, who's running for mayor. So go ahead with the 2-minute introduction.
Sure. I'm Mike McGinn, running for mayor. I live up in Greenwood. I've lived up there for quite some time. I was president of the Greenwood Community Council for years, working on sidewalks and dealing with development issues. I have 3 kids. We've all gone to Seattle Public Schools. One's still at Ballard. And I was also really active in the Sierra Club for years. And all of those things, one thing led to another. And as many of you know, I ran for mayor in 2013 and won. And I've been watching what's been happening in this city over the last few years with a lot of concern. We've seen rents and housing prices going up dramatically, and it's squeezing people out, just that cost alone. On the other side of the equation, we're seeing tax after tax to pay for the impacts of growth, except those taxes hit the people least able to pay. We have one of the most regressive state and local tax systems in the nation. It turns out we have a regressive local tax system too, where somebody who's low income will pay 3 times as much of their income as a percentage in taxes than someone from a higher income. And this is at the same time that we're seeing just an explosive growth in spending in the city. We've seen the general fund increase by $250 million over the last few years, 25% increase. So I want to work on those issues. We're told, even though that explosive growth, we don't have sufficient funds to deal with homelessness, which is a growing crisis. It's a very difficult issue, but it's a thing that dramatically growing as well. So my focus will be on how do we make sure we use our resources effectively to focus on those most in need, including focus on homelessness. How do we make sure that if we do ask for taxes, after looking for how we can save money in the budget, if we do ask for taxes, we do so in a more progressive way, whether it's an income tax if it's legal, or asking the big corporations that are enjoying such success to pay more, to help us meet our needs. I believe in Seattle. I've always believed in Seattle. And I believe that the experience I have, I can help make a difference.
Great, thank you. So now we have 4 prepared questions. We're asking all candidates for mayor, and they're actually right in front of you if you want to turn them over and read along as we read them aloud. And I think we left off, Sean, will you do number 1?
Sure. What is your strategy for implementing, leveraging, and perhaps improving the incentive zoning program to create diverse neighborhoods and ensure affordable housing?
Yeah, and so, even the phrase incentive zoning is now a little out of date because now it's a mandatory amount on new housing. I think you have to, this is one of these things that you have to look at to get it just right. It's kind of a Goldilocks issue, right? If you demand too much from new development, you can end up not getting either the market rate or the affordable. If you don't ask for enough, you feel like you're leaving money on the table for growth. I think we could do more on the luxury development, the big condos downtown. I think we need to be more careful when we're looking at what we're doing in neighborhoods, which is likely to provide more housing for middle income. I also think that the mandatory housing affordability is, it's just a slice of what's needed to be done. We really need to be looking at subsidized housing in general. I know we've done so with the housing levy. We need to look at making it easier for, backyard cottages or duplexes or triplexes to be built to give more affordable options in the city. There's a range of things we can look at. We need to look at, are there regulations that increase the cost of housing unnecessarily? We ask them for too much parking in new development, for example, in a place that's well served by transit. So I think there's a range of things we have to do to address housing affordability. I want to say one more thing about that too. The process we have has been very, very divisive, unfortunately. I respect and appreciate the good faith and the intentions of all the people who worked in the city on recommendations. But from my own experiences in Greenwood, when you develop something and call it a grand bargain without involving the people in the neighborhoods, and by the way, their views are as diverse as the people in the city, right? Some of them are adamantly opposed to stuff, some of the people think we should change everything, right? But you don't get change unless you really get everybody involved. So I think, these HALA recommendations, when they reach their conclusion, including the mandatory housing affordability, I don't think it's going to solve the problem. I think we're going to have to return to the question. And when I do so, I want to do so in a way that really involves neighborhoods and also talks about what do we bring along with the growth to make those neighborhoods work.
Right, Clayton, number 2.
In your review, what is the city's role in ensuring equal educational and achievement opportunity in Seattle public schools?
Yeah, so when I was mayor, I was talking about process. That's one of the things we did when I took office was we launched the Youth and Family Initiative. And it was a really different kind of process. It wasn't that let's get all the educational mucky mucks together to tell us what should happen. We actually went in the complete opposite direction. We got over 3,000 people in small groups, 10 at a time, and the question we asked, what do you need to make your kids succeed? And what they told us were things that were in the classroom, but they told us a lot of things that were outside the classroom. And that really informed, so each group of 10 people elected a delegate to a Youth and Family Congress, which came out with a lengthy list of recommendations, which informed the levy and which informed city policies as well, how we did our own business in the city. So when we focused on those, then moving forward, we expanded the levy. We had things like healthcare in schools. We had visiting dentists. That's one of the things you learn. If kids' teeth hurt, they're not going to learn. Right? I don't think we would have thought of that on our own if that hadn't been told to us. We launched an attendance campaign. If a kid misses school more than 10 times a year, that's a big predictor that they're not going to complete. High school, like any time in grammar school that happens, we had Jamal Crawford and Macklemore with recorded wake-up calls and we had prizes and things like that. And that was just organizing, right? That was like what we could do. And so there's a host of things that we looked at like that. We expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative to include more students. We advocated expanding it to from 18 to 21 because, if someone turns 18, it doesn't mean that they're no longer at risk. So I think the city's role is really, an overarching role of, you can't necessarily say what happens inside the classroom. That's the school district's job, but there's so much that happens outside the classroom that's so critical. And, housing, transportation, safe routes to school, the list goes on. And I think the most important thing in that process is actually to listen to families and kids themselves about what they need. And that's what we return to and go from there.
Great. Elizabeth, number 3.
What are your specific recommendations for completion and follow-up steps of the Seattle Police Department consent decree and ongoing steps to improve department relations with Seattle's residents?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that, this mayor and the chief and the council have really taken that consent decree seriously to make sure they follow through, working with the monitor and the judge and the Department of Justice. I actually sat in a meeting room for over a week negotiating that. And one of the things that was not in the original proposal from the DOJ, and this is kind of getting to what we have to do next, was there weren't really recommendations for how to improve the Office of Professional Accountability, which is officer discipline. There wasn't really a way for community engagement to talk about bias. And one of the things that came out of that agreement was the Community Police Commission, and they were tasked with the jobs of making recommendations in those areas, which they have, which were given, to the mayor and city council almost 3 years ago now, and still have not been enacted into law. And the reason I'm mentioning this is we know that the consent decree is going to end at some point. The boxes will be checked and everybody will say it's done. But I think we also know that there's no way that the relationships between the community and the police department will be perfect. It's just not going to be. We have a history of bias, whether it's implicit or in some cases explicit. That's real. That's far beyond the police department. That's society I'm talking about. I'm not singling out our police officers. They just deal with it in a very dramatic way. But we all deal with it. Housing, jobs, education, etc. This is going to be an ongoing issue. So I think the most important thing we can do, recognizing that the consent decree is going to come to a conclusion, is have an independent community police commission. That was formed for the purpose of the consent decree, and at the time we formed it, my hope was that it would be something that could grow into something permanent, and that's what they're asking for. With independent staffing, with budget, and with more authority, because these issues are going to come up again, and you need someone to hold the police department and the elected officials and the public accountable. And that police commission should have the strongest advocates for reform at the table, talking about what's next. So that's what is the next big thing in police reform.
Liz, number 4.
What is your strategy for dealing with homelessness in Seattle?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's really grown dramatically, and there's a variety of causes, so you have to have a variety of options. I think that there's a policy issue and there are policy differences, but I also think it's an issue of management, of how we manage the city resources and get to it. And I think we saw some delay in the city, right? Declaring an emergency and waiting for the state and feds to show up, and that was not a reasonable strategy. Even when I was in office, we were seeing the community development block grants, which supply homelessness spending decreasing. So I think what we need, and having said that, I think we're starting to see that urgency now. We're starting to see the experiment with new approaches, low barrier housing, 24-hour shelters, more case management with people in need. We've seen encampments as something that was being chased around, that was something I was trying to change into something that's not regulated, with actual tiny houses on place. So I think what we need to do is ramp up aggressively the amount of housing we have of some type, shelter or encampments or whatever is a short-term solution, so that we can say, you can't camp here, we have a place for you, right? And we can't say that now. I mean, that's just unconstitutional to tell somebody they have to move when there's no place to go. I mean, that's what the ACLU is claiming, and I think they got a good case. So we actually have to have a place. We have to manage those with compassion, and then we need to scale up, the approaches we're taking around rapid rehousing, navigation centers, and the other, innovations that are coming forward. I think we can do it. I think we can do a lot of it within our existing resources. If we can't do it within our existing resources, as I said in my opening statement, I think we have to look at, how do we make the big corporations that are part of the success of the city help pay for it, and not just always go for a more aggressive option.
Great, thank you. So now we'll open up to follow-up questions. These are one.
Oh, no, you got them. Okay.
I think that's all four, yeah. So now we have follow-up questions, 1 minute answers. John, then Ben, and then Brittany.
So just then at the end and then at the beginning, you mentioned getting more money out of big corporations.
Yeah.
Can you give us some specific
Sure.
ideas about how you
Sure.
do that? And are those ideas currently legal?
Yeah.
Is it reality, or we
Yes.
make changes?
There's 3 ideas, which two are big corporations, one is income. So the income tax is moving forward. And everybody understands it's going to be a test case. Another example is we've had, what's been called the employee head tax. You can have a tax per employee, and you can exempt smaller employees, and we had that actually, and it was helping raise money for streets, and the council got rid of it in the 2009 election, because that's what the Chamber of Commerce wanted then from candidates. So it's still out there and available. The third option is actually a very powerful one. You could take a look at the B&O tax, increasing the rate, and you could also increase the exemption. So you could dramatically increase the number of small businesses that don't have to pay. Because they're getting squeezed too, right? Oh, I didn't realize they had time, but they're getting squeezed too by rents and costs, right? So you can reduce the tax on small businesses, increase it on big businesses, and actually raise a lot of money that way. And you don't have to go to the ballot or anything, you can just do it in council.
Okay.
If they have the, what.
Okay. Ben, Brittany, and Liz.
Why did you decide to run for mayor again?
It's just what I put out there. I mean, I took office in 2009, and we were in the midst of a really deep recession, and I had to find over $60 million in cuts in my first year and try to preserve services. And I was watching how things were going, on housing prices and rent and homelessness. I'm seeing all this wealth in the city. I'm seeing the people who I worked for and fought for feeling like they're getting pushed out and left out, and that's just kind of what I believe in, and always have believed in terms of who I've tried to work for and represent, both as an advocate and as a mayor before, and post-mayor with some advocacy as well. So it was just really concerning me that I thought we were just drifting back to this situation where we're going to turn into San Francisco, a place for just the wealthy. Can my kids live in Seattle right now? I don't see how they get there. And as a parent, that's not something I want to, that's not the city I want to be in.
Great. Brittany, then Liz, then Clayton, then Ben.
During your tenure, you whispered on the street that you were difficult to work for and with. Can you address that?
Well, I think that I thought that the tunnel was a bad idea, and that put me at odds with the council on that issue. But the reality was we got a lot done. So I guess it would depend who you asked, about that. So, we passed paid sick leave, the double the families in education levy, we got more support for our libraries, my budgets went through easily. And on this regard, I did, over 100 town halls where I just went to every neighborhood and took Q&A. We would put together industry groups to come in and tell us what they wanted, and we'd work with them. So I was really accessible to a lot of people, and we were able to do a lot of small things. Good government is getting a lot of small things right, not just the big things. But I do think that my position on the tunnel, and kind of challenging the big guys on that, led to a contentious relationship And I'd also say, I reflected on all of that and thought hard about how would I do it again so as not to find myself facing that accusation. I think I could.
Liz, Clayton, and Bevan, and then others as time allows.
Hi, so my question was somewhat similar to Brittany's, but mine had more to do with a couple sticky wickets. And when you came into
Yeah.
office last time, there was the tunnel sticky wicket.
Right?
It's still there, it's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how many of the potential sticky wickets are gone, and have any hatchets been buried
Oh,
between the
please.
city attorney's
Yeah.
office and the mayor's office?
Actually, I had a nice chat with Pete at the last 36 meeting, and we're gonna have lunch together. And it was a fun exchange, actually. You know, I wanna say something else that kind of follows up, I think it's consistent with the last question and this question. You know, I also came into office, 8 years ago with just, God, I'm gonna change everything, I really wanna make things happen fast. And a little bit of the feeling that an advocate has, boy, if only people could listen to me, we could make things different. And when I was saying I reflected and thought about things, I could see the way in which that could rub some people the wrong way. And I think I really do I'm still passionate about the city, I still believe in a lot of things. But like I was talking about with the zoning changes, how you have to involve the neighborhoods if you want to make change. And I've really reflected on what it means to come in and listen to everybody and engage everybody in the process. Whether that's an important person or a less important person, everybody needs to feel that. So I do think it would be very different because I've had the opportunity to learn from my first try.
Clayton?
I would like to ask my question to some extent.
Yeah.
I'd like to.
And that was just a more specified version of a previous
So
question.
Clayton, go ahead with your question.
When the DOJ came to
Yeah.
town during your administration, Eric Holder was the Attorney General.
Right.
We now have a very different Attorney
Right.
General. Pete Holmes is still the city attorney.
Yes.
You had a very fraught relationship
Mhm.
with him, with your office and McGinn Holmes. And I'm wondering specifically how you would work to repair that relationship.
Well, like I said, I ran into Pete and I reached over to speak with him. And by the way, we had our differences, but we also had our agreements. I reached out to Pete and he must have heard my announcement speech because he said, well, Mike, I've known him too, he said. So that made me laugh. Yeah, I think Pete and I actually share some of those characteristics about being passionate about what we believe in and pushing and being in office changes my perspective. So no, I'm very confident about the ability to work with Pete or whoever's elected. He has a challenger. We can't presume anything in any race. And there's a whole bunch of new city council members that are different from ones that were there when I was there. And I've worked with some of them post then. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that. I know others been, but I've had really time to think about what it means to be in office and get things done. And I'm really excited about the potential opportunity to take that experience and put it to work, because any other candidate is going to face that same tough learning curve in which the city taught me a lot.
Bevan and then Sean, and then we'll be out of time. So Bevan, go ahead.
So I want to talk a little bit about foreign direct investment
Yeah.
in our infrastructure. I know that that's a big issue for other cities like Vancouver, but I know that Seattle's facing that as well. And what's your plan to make sure that at least a good portion of our city stays in those plans?
Oh, when you're talking about really just the purchase of real estate, essentially, yeah. I have followed that issue in Vancouver and seen what's happening, and I think the analysis that we have a really strong marketplace because of Amazon and demand, and then you see the foreign capital or the East Coast capital or the California capital flood in after it. I think that's happening. I'm really interested in seeing what tools we have. I would explore that, but I haven't seen anybody yet come up with one in which there's actually a legal way to address it. And if somebody has that, I'm wide open to that because I do think that pressure is part of the challenge we're facing here in the city, providing affordable housing for people.
Sean?
So, quickly, do you have any thoughts or concerns with residents leaving Seattle in the for neighboring cities in the presence of the city income tax?
That may happen. I also think that we may spur a statewide income tax, as we did with minimum wage sick leave or family medical leave. I think that's the role of a city to try to break open that debate. And you know, we actually both grew up in New York, and I paid a New York City income tax as well as a state income tax and a federal income tax. So there was an additional city income tax, and people paid it because, you know, cities have something special, which is why Amazon's here. We got something special. We all made it. They're profiting from it, and you know, if somebody needs to help pay for the impacts of that, they should help, along with all the other great companies. And by the way, we are blessed to be popular. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we had 9% unemployment, 99% unemployment when I took office. We worked really hard with the business community to make it, and labor, to, you know, create jobs and make it attractive for business. We've hit the jackpot, folks. It'd be nice if some of that, you know, spilled out to help the rest of us.
Great, well, we're out of time. If you want to take 30 seconds for a closing statement.
I guess I'll just say what I said before, which is I really love this city. I've had the opportunity to learn so much about it from being mayor. I was an advocate for years, involved in the community and the environment. I've had the time since mayor to think about what really matters, you know, and I feel like I have an opportunity here to contribute again. And I think this issue of what type of city we are and who is this wealth for and how do we make it work for all of us is like the pressing issue. It's the pressing issue for the city. And we have to get at that because, again, I don't want us to be an enclave for the wealthy. I want us to be a place for immigrants and refugees and kids and artists and families and everything that makes Seattle great.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.